king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 296, Amerigo comes to the door in order to explore the Granada route. Marin arranged for the shipyard to continue building ships while arranging spring plowing. Because the old Portuguese designer Varadu was very stubborn, Marin planned to build some 250 class armed merchant ships for use as merchant ships. Therefore, Marin eventually split the original Thorold shipyard into two parts. The old Portuguese designer Varadu continued to build 250 class armed merchant ships at the Thorold shipyard. The other half of the craftsmen, led by the most outstanding Venetian shipbuilder Bovani, came to Emden to build a new shipyard and began to manufacture British galleons with double gun decks according to Marin's design. In addition to the top deck, this new type of galleon also has closable windows on the lower deck to facilitate naval warfare. Moreover, its length-to-width ratio is set at 4:1. Moreover, Marin went big this time, directly launching a 500-ton class. Not only that, Marin also required the thickness of the ship's side to be strengthened to meet the needs of naval warfare and make it a professional warship. Of course, he didn't expect it to be completed quickly. Anyway, as long as this 500-ton British galleon was completed within this year, it would be fine. As long as the first one was built and the experience was gained, more ships could be built smoothly in the future. The biggest difficulty was that the first one was not easy to build. After all, there were very few 500-ton ships in Europe, let alone a brand new British galleon. As for old Velato, he continued to manufacture 250 class armed merchant ships. He already had mature manufacturing experience for this type of merchant ship, so he could start construction on two ships at the same time. It was estimated that the two ships would be launched in a few months. In addition, Marin also transferred 500 carpenters with good skills to join the Jolenscher shipyard to participate in the needs of the two 250 class armed merchant ships and cultivate their shipbuilding experience. After they matured, Marin would transfer them to the new shipyard in Emden to participate in the manufacture of 500-ton British galleons. As for what ship to use after recruiting Amerigo, Marin thought about it and decided to let Amerigo use the two small warships of more than 100 tons that Columbus eliminated. Because, exploring Granada is not a difficult task. After all, Columbus left a complete set of navigation information. Amerigo only needs to follow the strategy left by Columbus, follow the map, and directly follow the mature route to reach America without having to think about it. Moreover, Amerigo is also an bold driver in the sailing world. As long as he has a complete set of information in Marin's direction, exploring Granada is not a problem at all. On this day, Marin was signing and stamping an important document sent by Geoffrey in the palace, when suddenly a guard came to report that an Italian who called himself Amerigo Vespucci was clamoring to see Marin. Marin was shocked, and the gold and silver used for stamping fell to the ground, almost hitting Marin's feet. What's going on? I just sent someone to Italy to look for this guy, how come he showed up right at my doorstep? In fact, Amerigo was not originally going to find Marin. His original goal was to find Columbus, who served Marin. After meeting Columbus in Genoa more than 2 years ago, Amerigo, who was fond of sailing and exploration, soon went to Spain to look for opportunities. But he was unlucky. After arriving in Spain, he found that the Spanish had lost interest in continuing to explore the wild continent, America, and had not yet formed a fleet to continue exploring America. Therefore, Amerigo had to stay in Spain. When Marin presented the information about the Indian route, Spain finally began to build a long-distance fleet. Amerigo originally wanted to squeeze into this fleet and travel to the legendary India. Unfortunately, this time, because there was ready-made navigation information in Columbus, the old driver, was leading the way, it was foolproof. Therefore, this voyage to India was very popular in Spain. Many noble children, in order to gain credit, used their connections to squeeze into the fleet. Even if they were incompetent, it didn't matter, because they just had to follow the ship of the old driver Columbus. Therefore, under such circumstances, Amerigo, an Italian, was naturally ruthlessly eliminated because it was not his turn to be a foreigner who was not valued, to have such a good thing as discovering India, which was relatively safe. In desperation, Amerigo thought of Columbus, who was far away in East Frisia. Amerigo and Columbus had some friendship. So Amerigo rushed to East Frisia by land, hoping to squeeze into Columbus's fleet and visit India because of their previous friendship. By the way, he also recorded some precious navigation information in the nautical chart, published it to earn fame, or sold it to those who needed it. Unfortunately, he arrived at an inopportune time. When he arrived in East Frisia, Columbus's fleet had already set out southward. In desperation, Amerigo made up his mind and went to the palace of Auric to ask for an audience with Marin, hoping to find a good job here by recommending himself. Unfortunately, Amerigo did not know German, and the palace guards did not know Italian or Latin. So Amerigo had to talk to the guards anxiously, but the guards did not know the same language as him. Fortunately, Amerigo was well dressed, and the guards thought he was a noble, so they didn't make things difficult for him. Otherwise, he would have been thrown out long ago. How could an ordinary person meet a noble whenever he wanted? Fortunately, when Amerigo was arguing with the guard at the door, a guard who came to change shifts heard Amerigo calling himself Amerigo. Coincidentally, Marin ordered someone to go to Italy to find Amerigo that day, and this guard was standing guard nearby. So, this guard hurried back and reported to Marin. After hearing this, Marin was shocked for a moment, then he ran to the door in a hurry. Marin ran and thought, Amerigo, come to my bowl. Then, Marin saw Amerigo, who was arguing with the guard at the door with a red face and thick neck. However, what made Marin laugh was that Amerigo used Latin, which was commonly used by European aristocrats, and how could the guard at the door understand such a high-sounding language? The two of them, one in Latin and the other in German, kept talking there. But in fact, no one understood what the other was saying. Fortunately, the guard on duty had a good temper. If he had been more irritable, he would have kicked Amerigo away in anger. Marin hurried forward and asked in Latin, "Excuse me, is this Mr. Amerigo Vespucci?" Amerigo was startled, turned around, and saw Marin. However, because Marin was not wearing a noble suit, Amerigo did not know that the Count Marin he was looking for was right in front of him. Of course, Amerigo was still very happy that someone could finally communicate with him in Latin. So he asked back, "I am Amerigo, who are you?" "I am Marin von Hoffmann, Mr. Vespucci, welcome to East Frisia." Marin extended a hand of friendship. "Are you Count Marin?" Amerigo was surprised. After all, he had never seen Marin before. Seeing that Marin was so young and wearing ordinary woolen clothes instead of the gorgeous silk robes that nobles like to wear to show off, he thought Marin was a Latin translator. However, when he saw the guards around him saluting Marin one after another, he soon believed it. "Yes, I am Mr. Vespucci, come this way." After being surprised, Amerigo followed Marin into the palace. Amerigo was actually a man who was keen on fame and fortune, otherwise he would not have traveled all the way from Italy to Spain to look for opportunities. He was born into a wealthy merchant family in Florence, Italy. His father was a wealthy bank notary. Because of his good family background, Amerigo received a very good education in his youth and learned Latin, which was commonly used by nobles and missionaries. In addition, he was also a person who studied astronomy. Originally in history, before his death, he became the royal astronomer of King Ferdinand II of Spain. Of course, in this era, every outstanding navigator is also an astronomer. Because navigators need to use the sun, moon and stars as a reference to determine the position and direction of the ship. Over time, every navigator has a good level of astronomy. After all, in this era, without telescopes and sextants, navigators could only rely on their own eyes to judge and calculate when sailing on the sea. Those who could become navigators were not ordinary people. However, after all, Amerigo was just a commoner. But Amerigo envied Columbus for obtaining a title and fiefdom through sailing. He also wanted to learn from Columbus and obtain a noble title through sailing. He didn't want a baron, just a knight would be enough. So, he left Italy and went to Spain to look for opportunities, eager to make merit and be awarded. When he saw that there was no opportunity in Spain, he went to East Frisia. Through the conversation, Marin found that Amerigo was indeed a talented sailor. Therefore, Marin was determined to recruit Amerigo. "Mr. Vespucci, you have been to Spain, so you must know that I have 15 colonies in the savage continent, right?" After Columbus presented the nautical chart, the Spanish royal family specially publicized the news that Marin was named the Count of Savage Continent and had the colonial rights to 15 colonies. The purpose was to occupy the first discovery right so as to find an excuse to intervene in the Indian trade. Although Portugal was angry, Spain deployed 20,000 troops on the Spanish-Portuguese border, which frightened Portugal. In desperation, Portugal had to acquiesce in the fact that Spain participated in the Indian trade. After all, on land, Portugal is really weak. Even if the Spanish fleet can be defeated at sea, so what? They can besiege your capital from land. Moreover, in order to emphasize its right of discovery, Spain deliberately emphasized in its propaganda that Columbus was sent by the Spanish royal family to find India, but did not drag Marin into the water. Therefore, the Portuguese did not know that Columbus was actually sent by Marin. This saved Marin from disaster, otherwise, the anger of Portugal was not something Marin could bear now. Of course, internal personnel like Amerigo who once joined the official Spanish navigation agency still knew the fact that Columbus was actually Marin's man. Therefore, Amerigo found East Frisia this time. Yes, I did hear about this when I was in Spain. Amerigo Vespucci nodded. This incident could be said to be the biggest news in Spain in the second half of 1499. As long as the news was not too obscure, everyone would have heard about it. Now, Columbus has gone to lead the Spanish fleet and will not be back for 2 years. I need a navigator to go to America, oh no, to the wild continent to find a suitable place for colonization. Mr. Count, what do you mean? Amerigo was excited. He didn't even need to ask for help, the Count was already recruiting him. I would like to invite you to join the East Frisian Navy and go to the savage continent to find a suitable island as my first colony. Island? Lord Earl, since it is a wild continent, why not colonize directly on the land? Wouldn't the land area be larger? Mr. Vespucci, you don't understand. Tropical regions, well, they are hot regions. Europeans will not be used to them. Living there for a long time will easily lead to serious diseases, such as malaria. As a result, the mortality rate is very high. Moreover, there are many indigenous people in the land areas. If we establish a colony on land, we will be easily attacked by the indigenous people. Sir, the natives are so ignorant and backward, they should not be able to stop our European army, right? Amerigo asked back. That being said, we must first gain a foothold and let my men adapt to the tropical climate. For this purpose, I have chosen a very nice island. What kind of island? Asked Amerigo with great interest. I call this island Granada. It's not very big, but it has one advantage that other tropical areas don't have: there are no poisonous snakes or insects. No poisonous snakes or insects. Amerigo didn't quite understand what the relationship was between poisonous snakes and insects and diseases. He wasn't a time traveler, so how could he know that many tropical diseases were spread by poisonous insects? Well, you don't need to understand this. You just need to know that this way people will be less likely to get tropical diseases such as malaria. Oh, not prone to tropical diseases, seems to be doing well. At this time, the great voyages had just begun, and Europeans had not suffered from tropical diseases. Therefore, Amerigo obviously did not know enough about the terrible extent of tropical diseases. Well, Mr. Vespucci, will you discover this island for me? In return, if you do, I will knight you and grant you a fiefdom. I am willing, Count. Amerigo Vespucci is happy to serve you. Before Marin finished speaking, the fame-seeking Amerigo agreed. When he learned that Columbus had left a complete set of navigation information, and that he only needed to lead his fleet along Columbus's route to a place called the Windward Islands, and then head south to find a small island close to the mainland, he was even more surprised. Because this was simply too easy to challenge. Even the strategy was given in advance, so how difficult could it be? In this way, Marin and Amerigo quickly signed an employment agreement and a confidentiality agreement. Afterwards, Amerigo placed his hand on the Bible and swore allegiance to Marin. So far, the second famous navigator became Marin's general. Chapter 297 Milan changes ownership in the mountains of northern Italy. On the southern mountain road of the Tellina Valley connecting the Mustere Valley in the Graubünden region of Switzerland, a group of embarrassed knights came. Duke Ludovico Sforza of Milan and his remaining 1,500 light cavalry were walking in a panic on the mountain road towards the Tellina Valley. After more than a year of hard fighting, the Duchy of Milan was defeated. After all, the difference in strength between the Duchy of Milan and France was too great. Although the Duchy of Milan prepared 35,000 troops this time, it was powerless in front of the 30,000 French troops. Why? Because the difference in the quality of the two armies was too great. The French cavalry were all knights and apprentice knights from knight families, all of them were highly skilled in martial arts. The infantry were even more powerful, and were the most capable Swiss mercenaries in Europe. On the other hand, the Milanese army's cavalry were all light cavalry, and the infantry were all Italian mercenaries with average combat power. The combat power of both sides was completely unequal. Fortunately, after being reminded by Marin, Ludovico Sforza did not send Trabocchio and Count Caiazzo, two traitors, to lead the troops. Therefore, the Duchy of Milan did not surrender to France on a large scale this time. Therefore, the Duchy of Milan lasted much longer than in history. Moreover, this time, the Milanese army mostly hid in the fortress for defense, and did not fight the French troops in the field. Therefore, this largely offset the lack of combat effectiveness of the army. Therefore, the French had to fight a protracted siege. After all, neither the French knights nor the Swiss mercenaries could fly, and it was difficult for them to easily conquer the tall city walls. However, the French still have a trump card, that is, artillery. Seeing that the attack was hopeless, Louis XII simply sent people back to the country to pull heavy artillery. Then, after the French brought in a batch of 12-pound bronze heavy artillery from their homeland, they launched a fierce bombardment on several Milanese fortresses. Although the Milanese fortress was made of stone and was very solid, it was not a bastion structure that could withstand bombardment. So after several months of bombardment, the solid stone walls were also breached. Then, the French captured several fortresses on the Milan border and approached the city of Milan. As a city with a population of 100,000, Milan's defenses must be extremely strong. The Duke of Milan led more than 10,000 men and relied on the strong city of Milan to resist the French. The walls of Milan are not comparable to those of the fortresses on the border. Because Milan is huge and prosperous, the dukes of Milan in all dynasties were willing to spend money to strengthen the walls. The French heavy artillery could not break through the walls after bombarding for a long time. However, by the spring of 1500, the Milanese themselves had a big problem. It turned out that Milan city was out of food. After all, the city of Milan has a population of 100,000, plus the 16,000 troops led by the Duke of Milan. The daily food consumption is an astronomical figure. However, after several months of siege, Milan ran out of food, and signs of instability soon appeared in the army. In desperation, Ludovico Sforza had to lead 2,000 trusted light cavalrymen to open the east gate late at night and break out of the French defense gap. During the breakout, 500 cavalrymen were stopped by the Swiss. In this way, Ludovico Sforza fled to the Turline Valley where a fortress had been built with only the remaining 1,500 light cavalry and his most loyal jousting general San Severino. The commander ran away, so naturally the city of Milan surrendered. As soon as Ludovico Sforza ran away, the city of Milan surrendered the next day. Louis XII swaggered into the city of Milan with his army. Sure enough, the two traitors, Trivulzio and Count Caiazzo, immediately came out to lick the French king. Because of Marin's reminder, the two were not valued in the previous battles and were also monitored. Therefore, they had no chance to betray. But now that the French have entered the city, they immediately jumped out and said they wanted to be puppet soldiers. Fortunately, the Duke of Milan had listened to Marin's advice and built a strong fortress in the Turina Valley, and secretly stored a lot of money and food here. Not only that, there were 4,000 soldiers stationed here, led by a confidant of Ludovico Sforza. Even the Duke of Milan's young son had been brought here a long time ago. With sufficient money and food, as well as 5,500 soldiers and horses, plus the advantageous terrain in Graubünden controlled by Maximilian I behind it, even the French would have to think twice. Because the Tellina Valley is only a narrow valley, which can be described as one man guarding the pass, 10,000 men cannot break through. Moreover, the Duke of Milan had built a strong defensive fortress in the valley in advance. The steep terrain and strong fortress made it difficult to break through no matter how many people you have. Moreover, the north of the Tellina Valley is the Emperor's territory, and supplies can be continuously transported from the Graubünden area. I believe that if the French come to attack the Tellina Valley, Maximilian I will definitely not sit idly by. Therefore, under such circumstances, Ludovico Sforza, who had sufficient money, food and troops, could stay here for a long time. You know, after several fortresses on the front line were breached, Duke Ludovico Sforza sent his confidants to escort 200,000 gold coins here. By the way, he also sent his son here. With this money, plus the large amount of money and food that was already stored here, the Duke of Milan and his more than 5,000 men will have no problem staying here for a few years. What's more, even if he has no money and no food, Emperor Maximilian I will definitely be willing to lend it to him. Because Maximilian I naturally doesn't get along with the French. After Ludovico Sforza fled with more than 1,000 people, Louis XII did not send troops to stop him. Judging from the direction of his escape, Louis XII believed that the Duke of Milan had fled to Austria. Obviously, the French were unwilling to turn against the Holy Roman Empire. Moreover, Louis XII did not know that Ludovico Sforza had secretly transferred a large amount of money and grain. You know, the Duchy of Milan is the second richest state in Italy, richer than Naples. Because, although the agriculture of the Duchy of Milan is comparable to that of Naples, the handicraft industry of the Duchy of Milan is too developed. Therefore, the Duchy of Milan has a lot of taxes, second only to Venice in Italy. Even if Duke Ludovico transferred more than 200,000 gold coins, there were still 300,000 gold coins and a large amount of other property left in the palace, so that Louis XII could eat his fill. Moreover, after the French army entered the city, they looted the largest city in Italy, larger than Venice, but not as rich as Venice, and took away more valuable property. The looting lasted for 5 days, and almost all the citizens of Milan were robbed clean. Therefore, the citizens of Milan were very resentful of the French army. A feeling of dissatisfaction arose among the citizens. 10 days later, Louis XII continued to march south with his army. Because he still had to attack the Kingdom of Naples. As for Milan, Louis XII left it to a few rebels who had defected from Milan. The commander was Trivulzio, who was the first to defect to the French. Before leaving, Louis XII also looted a lot of food from all over the Duchy of Milan to supply the army. Moreover, he only left 7,000 soldiers for Trivulzio to prevent Trivulzio from becoming too powerful. At the same time, Louis XII did not leave any food for Trivulzio, but only gave him 20,000 gold coins as military expenses. But how could this little money be enough? In desperation, after the French robbed him, Trivulzio continued to rob the citizens and sent soldiers to the countryside to steal food. In this way, Trivulzio became a complete villain in the eyes of the Milanese. At this time, the Milanese began to miss the more Ludovico Sforza who had been cursed by them. Chapter 298, Solving the technical problems of building large ships. After becoming the second navigator under Marin, Amerigo began to prepare for the selection of crew members. At the same time, he required that a large ship of more than 200 tons must be used to ensure the safety of the voyage. After all, a ship that is too small is not very resistant to wind and waves. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean is different from going to India. The route to India is basically along the coast of Africa, and the only sea crossed is the relatively calm Arabian Sea. But crossing the Atlantic Ocean is different. Although Amerigo has never been to America, he has heard that the waves in the deep Atlantic Ocean are still very strong. Marin naturally agreed with this. It was estimated that Columbus and his crew would take at least a year and a half to go back and forth, but it would not take too much time to go to Granada. Columbus's fleet took only 70 days to cross the Atlantic from the Canary Islands. And it took only more than a month to go from Emden to the Canary Islands. Therefore, it only takes more than 3 months, more than half a year, to go back and forth from Emden to the Windward Islands. Therefore, Marin had enough time to prepare. For safety reasons, Marin decided to wait until the 250 class armed merchant ships at the Thornshire shipyard were completed before handing them over to Amerigo. The construction technology of the 250 class merchant ships was mature now, and it would be completed in a few months. These few months were just right for Amerigo to take a group of new sailors to practice at sea. Although Marin still had a group of old sailors who were rotated from Columbus's fleet, he did not intend to use all of them. Because he needed to train more sailors. Therefore, Marin only selected some old sailors to follow the ship, and first used those small boats of more than 100 tons to practice the great voyage in the North Sea. Most of the sailors on the ship were young sailors who were selected from fishermen's families and had received sailor training. In this way, led by the old sailors, they could also become old sailors after a voyage. In order to show his importance to navigation, Marin personally accompanied Amerigo to inspect the shipyards of Thornhill and Emden. But the results of the inspection made Marin frown. The Thornhill shipyard was fine, just following the routine. But the Emden shipyard encountered technical problems. It turned out that Marin asked the Emden shipyard to try to build a 500-ton ship, which would definitely increase the difficulty. Other places were fine, but the ribs in the shipbuilding keel frame became a big problem. Generally speaking, European sailing wooden boats are built by laying the keel first and then covering it with planks. The keel is a bit like a fish bone, with a main keel and many curved ribs. The main keel is actually quite easy to find. The only requirement is that it is long enough. For example, the San Gabriel, the flagship of Vasco da Gama's exploration of India, was 25.7 meters long. Of course, this is the length of the upper deck. The main keel at the bottom of the ship is about 20 meters long. Although it is difficult to find 20-meter-long oak materials, you can still buy them at a high price. However, it is difficult to have a longer keel. For example, the Swedish ship Gothenburg. Marin had read articles about their retro shipbuilding in his previous life and knew that the oak trees they used to make keels must be grandfather oak trees with an age of more than 300 years and a diameter of more than 5 meters. This kind of oak is very rare in Europe. After all, Europeans have been cutting down and using oak trees for thousands of years. Of course, the keel of the Gothenburg is also very long, reaching 40.9 meters. Such extra-long wood is very precious in Europe now. Because 300-year-old trees are rare in Europe. However, Marin knows that in America at this time, because there is no developed civilization, trees are rarely cut down. Therefore, in North America, there are many super-old oak trees that have grown for hundreds of years and are 40 or 50 meters long. Because, for tens of millions of years, no one has cut down trees on a large scale in the forests of North America. Therefore, Marin planned to go to North America for logging and shipbuilding. In the forests of North America, extra-long keel oaks like the keel of the Gothenburg are not expensive at all and are everywhere. In order to build Spanish galleons, the Spanish later moved the base for building large ships to America. Marin remembered reading in an article that around 1610, Spain moved the base for building large ships to Havana, Cuba, in order to directly utilize the abundant timber resources there. Of course, Marin is now building 500-ton ships, not 1,150-ton ships like the Gothenburg. Therefore, Marin does not need 40-meter-long wood from 300-year-old trees, but only needs a 30-meter-long keel. Although the price will be more expensive, it is not impossible to find. However, building ribs for large ships is a very troublesome matter. You know, the great voyages have just begun, and the shipbuilding technology is not yet developed. After learning about the situation, Marin was surprised to find that the ribs of this era were actually sawed out of a whole piece of wood. You should know that ribs are different from the main keel. The main keel is straight, but the ribs are curved. The ribs are nailed to the main keel. Generally speaking, the ribs installed on the bow are pairs of V-ribs, while the ribs in the middle of the ship are U-shaped. V-shaped ribs are simple, just nail two relatively straight long wooden boards to the keel. But U-shaped ribs are more troublesome, but the most used ribs on a ship are U-shaped. Moreover, in this era, the U-shaped ribs used by people are mostly curved ribs sawed from relatively thick logs, which is a great waste of wood. It's okay to build a small ship, but if you build a big ship, the ribs need to be made from hundreds of years old oak wood, which is very wasteful. Marin was a little surprised. In his memory, the Gothenburg replica ship was built using retro technology, and it was made by using steam to soften straight wooden boards and then bending them. However, Marin did not think about it. Even the original Gothenburg was an 18th century ship. The shipbuilding technology at that time was definitely much better than that at the end of the 15th century. It can even be said that it was the great voyages that promoted the advancement of European shipbuilding technology. After all, necessity is the mother of invention. Marin didn't know when the technology of using steam to soften and change the shape of ribs appeared, but he at least knew that his shipyard didn't have this technology at the moment. Even some Portuguese shipbuilders had never heard of this technology. Therefore, Marin determined that this was a technology that had not yet appeared. Seeing that the Emden shipyard was worried about not being able to find enough thick oak to process the curved ribs, Marin directly told them about the technology he had seen of using steam to soften and change the shape of the ribs. The old shipbuilders were skeptical about this. However, facts speak louder than words. Marin immediately sent someone to make a long box to put the wood that needed to be softened. Then, he asked a blacksmith to make a large iron pot with a fixed lid and a pipe to guide the steam. After everything was ready, under the direction of Marin, the craftsman put the wood that needed to be softened into a long box and semi-sealed it. Then, the big iron pot started to boil water, and the pipes passed the steam into the semi-sealed long box. After 5 or 6 hours of steaming the wood, the board finally softened. But Marin knew from the article about the construction of the Gothenburg that he had read in his previous life that this softening could only last for 20 minutes. So he quickly ordered the craftsman to bend the wood within 20 minutes. Sure enough, after 20 minutes, the wood began to harden, but it was bent and deformed before, so it did deform. However, there were also some signs of rebound. Therefore, the craftsman simply made a groove to hold the wood that needed to be bent, so that the planks could reach the shape required for shipbuilding. When the wood was dried, it was exactly the shape the shipbuilders needed. After several days of experimentation, the craftsman finally became familiar with the process, and the cost of making several meter-long curved ribs was greatly reduced. In the past, they had to saw curved ribs from very thick logs, which was very wasteful because most of the scraps from the thick logs used to saw the ribs were wasted. But after using the steam softening technology provided by Marin, they can directly process ordinary several meter-long wooden boards into curved ship ribs using the steam softening method. In this way, a lot of costs can be saved. Because several meter-long straight wooden boards are easy to find and the price is cheap. Unlike before, they needed to find very thick logs, which were more expensive and wasted wood. In this way, Marin used the processing method of the Swedish Gothenburg antique ship he had seen in his previous life to easily solve a technical difficulty in building a large ship. The 500-ton warship that Marin required was also successfully manufactured. As for the issue of confidentiality of technology, Marin did not have to worry about it, because most of the craftsmen in the Emden shipyard were Marin's serfs. Other craftsmen who were not serfs also signed lifelong contracts. Their families were all here, so there was no need to worry about them running away with the technology. At the beginning, when separating the Thorold shipyard, Marin considered the issue of confidentiality. Therefore, he kept the craftsmen hired from Portugal who did not sign a lifetime contract at the Thorold shipyard, and the stubborn Portuguese old man Velado led them to continue to manufacture the 250 class armed merchant ships. The serf craftsmen who would build warships in the future, the Venetian craftsmen who signed a lifetime contract, and a small number of Portuguese craftsmen were all arranged to work at the Emden shipyard to build warships. In the future, the Thorold shipyard specialized in building ships, while the Emden shipyard was responsible for building warships, with a clear division of labor. Merchant ships are different from warships. For example, on a 24-meter-long keel, merchant ships generally only need 33 pairs of ribs. There are a lot of gaps between the ribs, which are directly covered with wooden boards. However, in this case, because of the existence of these gaps, if the enemy's iron ball shells hit these gaps during naval battles, it is easy to break the wooden boards outside, causing a goof effect. In that case, water will enter the side of the ship, and it may even cause the ship to sink. Therefore, when warships are manufactured, more ribs are often used, they are arranged tightly together without leaving any gaps, and the wooden boards on the outside are also thicker. In manufacturing the 500-ton warship, the craftsmen followed Marin's requirements to leave no gaps between the ribs. To this end, more than 60 pairs of ribs needed to be nailed on a 30-meter keel, which was very compact, but also very time-consuming, labor-intensive and material-consuming. Fortunately, Marin provided the technology of steam softening and processing ribs in a timely manner, which greatly reduced the cost of rib processing. Otherwise, the cost would be outrageous. Marin left the Emden shipyard with satisfaction, thinking proudly as he walked, as expected, time travelers are the most amazing. The difficult technical problems that were difficult for the craftsmen to solve were solved by time travelers with just a simple recollection.